All right. Well, welcome to everyone here and to everyone who will be watching this later on. My name is David Carvalho with the Diocese of Fall River here on Equipped Catholics, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Dr. Susan Windley-Daoust. Susan, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. We're doing good today. It's a good day here on the East Coast of Massachusetts. How is Minnesota?
Still overcoming the reality that the twins are out. It's kind of a big deal around here. But otherwise, it's a beautiful fall day. So
Awesome. Well, I won't get into about the Red Sox because they're not the hottest these days either. We should probably be bringing on someone from the Archdiocese of Baltimore because they seem to be in a much better situation.
Well, next
But
week.
here we are. Thankfully, we don't work for baseball. Thankfully, we work for Jesus. And that's why we're here today. So soon, we're so glad that you can make some time to join us here and to aid all of us as part of the Equipped Catholics community in our diocese. For those who may not be familiar with Susan, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Okay, my name is Susan Windley-Daoust, and I'm the Director of Missionary Discipleship for the Diocese of Winona-Rochester. That's southern Minnesota, so basically most of the counties that are south of Minneapolis-St. Paul area. We have a kind of famous bishop, Bishop Robert Barron. We're surprised too. So that's us, and I'm married to my husband, Jerry, who has done a lot of writing and publishing in the Catholic arena. Jerry Windley-Daoust and my 5 kids. So their ages 14 through 23 at this point. And on the side, I run a little thing called Creative Evangelization, where I help speak and support other parishes that are thinking about how to turn towards mission and particularly become evangelizing parishes. That's me.
Wow. So between your work for the diocese and your work for creative evangelization, helping parish evangelization is really your life's focus, and we're grateful that you do it.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's a pleasure. It's all good. Seriously, it's all good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, amidst all of that, and amidst of a former life of teaching at seminary, at college, is that correct?
Well, I did teach some seminarians, but I taught at University of St. Thomas as a theology professor for about 5 years, and then St. Mary's University of Minnesota in Winona, the town that I live in, for another 18. So
wow. So a shift from academia to the nuts and bolts of parish evangelization. And amidst all that, you had time to write a book, The 4 Ways Forward of Parish Evangelization. Yeah. So I'm imagining that between your work as a diocese director of missionary discipleship and your work of teaching and in writing this book, there's been a lot you've unearthed about kind of the challenges of parish life and how to actually move forward. Before we kind of maybe talk about the ways forward, what did, in the midst of that, what did you unearth are really some challenges, maybe some that surprised you that you weren't expecting in the midst of writing the book?
Yeah, well, I mean, when I began working as director of missionary discipleship for our diocese, the first thing I did was that I went and I talked to every pastor in our diocese kind of on his own home ground, at his parish or at his cluster of parishes, because I wanted to get a better lay of the land and also know what they were seeing, what their own perspective was on this evangelization piece. It's not like our diocese had done nothing prior to hiring me on. Pope Francis had, given some really great resources, all of that. And what I continually got from talking to pastors is that, first off, there's nobody against evangelization, which is really good news, praise be to God. But on the other hand, how to actually turn a parish around from having one type of culture that really, if it wasn't hostile to evangelization, it was at least deeply scared of evangelization, to, the type of parish culture where evangelization is really seen as the joy of the gospel, right? As Pope Francis, named his first apostolic exhortation. So a lot of the book really came out of my effort to try to figure out. It's like there's so much material out there right now, so many programs, and so many of them are frankly very, very good, to just try to put this all in one place. And it's kind of, there needs to be a way to figure out what's the first step, what's the second step, what's the third step, what's the fourth step. Because, just throwing a program at a problem and hoping that it'll fix things just wasn't working. And they knew that. There's there's something bigger going on here. This is not a programmatic fix. This is a cultural fix. Right? We need to change the subculture of our parish to meet the culture change that has occurred outside of our parish. So that's what I learned.
I mean, it's so true what you say, that it's not a programmatic need, it's a cultural need, because I think our tendency is to want to find the newest thing, the latest and the greatest, and run it. And what I found can be a pitfall is that once you do that a couple times and it doesn't work because the issue is deeper, people can become jaded around the concept of evangelization. Like, oh, we've tried that, it doesn't work. Or
that's exactly right. Right.
And I think that, the first, piece that I've kind of had to recognize is, do we have the right mindset? And how do we generate that kind of mindset? Can you kind of speak a little bit to that? What would you recommend to a pastor, to a parish leader? What are some of the first things that you could do to make sure that your parish has the right mindset around evangelization, especially if you've tried things and it's failed?
Right. Well, it's a huge question. Okay. Honestly, I think the mindset really needs to come from the Lord, right? This is not quite as simple as a self-help book, where it's like, okay, well, if I put on, these goals, that'll put me in the right place. But we really need to pray for God's vision for our parishes, right? We need to pray for God's vision for our parishes, because if we have the Lord's vision, then we're going to have the joy and the persistence and the conviction to keep going. I mean, trying one program because you recognize there was a problem, and that's good, right? That's actually a good first step. I mean, maybe you could have discerned that program better. Maybe it wasn't the right program for your particular parish, and one program's never going to do it by itself, but that was a real step in the right direction. So discouragement is not the right response. It's a learning process, right? So hopefully you take that and you learn, it's like either that wasn't what our parish really needed, or our parish needed more, and how do we build on that? Who did that serve? But who did it not serve? And think a little bit more along that line. But if we don't have a vision that really accompanies the mission of the church, which is the Great Commission, I think it's very hard for American Catholics to visualize what an evangelizing parish looks like. What does a parish look like that's really cracking on all cylinders with this one? Because we've never seen it, right? Or the vast majority of us have just never seen it. It's happened. It exists in the history of the church, but if we haven't seen it, it's very hard for us to easily replicate it. Doesn't mean we can't do it. We can. But if it feels hard, it's because it is kind of hard. It is kind of hard, but it is doable, and especially with the Lord's help. So I would always say start with vision.
So that piece, in your book named 4 Ways Forward, you name 4 ways forward in that regard. Can you talk a little bit about what those are? And, to your point of we may not know what they look like what do they look like?
Right. Well, these 4 ways forward are really these emerging models that have come out of what, John Paul II named the new evangelization. And it's a great phrase to talk about the new evangelization. The challenge that I have with it is that, even John Paul II, I think, could have been a lot clearer about what that meant. He's like, well, it's new, it's different. It does tend to focus more on people who have drifted away from the church or have stepped away. It's not so much like evangelization is off in another country over there, but evangelization actually is for us. And a lot of the emerging models really do recognize that and really lift that up. So the 4 models, real quick. First one is radical hospitality and first proclamation. Okay, so people know what it means to be hospitable. At least they say they do, right? I mean, it means this, a deep welcoming of the stranger. That's what hospitality means. It's a lot more than being nice. And when you put the radical nature of that, put hospitality first, right? Welcoming the stranger first, and match that with the first proclamation. And that is the basic message that Jesus Christ has a plan for your life, and it's glorious and it's wonderful, and it doesn't matter where you've been or who you are. We ask you to come, to turn to God, repent, to turn to God, and to listen to the good news. Now, there's lots of ways that you could talk about that first proclamation, but it sort of boils down to that, right? It's a message that communicates to that person in a way that he or she can hear that Jesus Christ is actually our Savior, right? That he changes things, so many big, wonderful things. Okay, so that's number 1. And if I'm going to go ahead and just throw some examples of this, it's like, if you're familiar with Alpha, if you're familiar with Christ Life, they're both really good examples of radical hospitality, first proclamation. That's one model. Second model is the multiplication model. It's like the small group spiritual multiplication model. If you're familiar with Focus, which is very active on college campuses, but also some parishes as well, they're the ones that are really, they've done the most with this so far in the United States. And everybody knows the strength of faith sharing small groups, right? But the thing that this insight that really came out of the past few years is that when you take those small groups and you actually prepare people not just to go deeper into their discipleship, but to go out and make more disciples, right? And you name how to do that, excuse me, by just starting another small group. You don't stick with your small group forever and ever and ever, amen, right? It's like you do it for 1 year, and then you go out and you find 3 entirely new people, and you do it again. It's a really simple thing, to be perfectly honest, but it's just not something that we tend to think about because we tend to treasure, our small group experiences, kind of like, oh, I want to meet with these people forever. And it's not like you can't do that, but you're called to share it with 3 people who don't have that gift. Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's called multiplication because, if you have a group of like 4 or 5 or 6, it begins to multiply very, very quickly. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. That's the second model. Third model, I'm going to jump to signs and wonders. Okay. So there's nothing new about this. It's all over the book of Acts. It's basically the book of Acts transplanted into our century. But I would argue that there has been a real focus on the mystery and the grandeur of God, and bringing that mystery and grandeur of God to people who believe, are tempted to believe that it's too good to be true. Right? Too good to be true. But when you really have an opportunity to encounter that mystery and to encounter grandeur, again, it breaks open people's lives in the most amazing ways. That it's kind of like it really breaks open minimally their curiosity, but maybe a whole lot more than that. When you see something that you simply can't explain happening before your eyes, you have an opportunity there, and you have a choice to make about whether you're going to continue to ask questions about that. It's kind of like, what did I just see there, right? Or are you going to turn away? But it's a lot harder to turn away, right? So for signs and wonders, yeah, I mean, I am talking to some degree about charismatic renewal, which, has really gone like this since the Second Vatican Council, but it doesn't have to be charismatic renewal. I mean, I think that actually that the Eucharistic revival is very much kind of focused in a signs and wonders mentality, especially the way that it's really inviting people to take on Eucharistic adoration. not just people, but parishes in particular, to offer that to people. There's a sense of mystery there that feels very new to people, right? And particularly our younger people who really gravitate toward it. So that's the third one. And now number 4 is the reorganization one. It's like the organizational mission piece. It's hard to go ahead and put all of our money and people power and structure one way and then just tell everybody it's like, okay, now we're going to do evangelization, right? I mean, you actually have to think a little bit about where your energy is going and where you're putting your funding and all of those things. You just need to rethink and reset your mission to fit the people and the structure. It's as simple as that, but it's not necessarily easy. It's very doable, though. I mean, we do strategic planning all the time. It's basically, how do you strategically plan for evangelization and not just assume it's going to happen on the side, right? It usually means looking at your entire parish from start to finish. So those are the four models. And my basic argument is, if you do 3 of those models, fairly naturally, you're going to change the culture of your parish. But if you only do 1, you won't. And if you only do 2, you'll be doing better, but you still won't. It won't overcome the power of a reigning culture unless you do at least 3 of them. So
yeah.
I
mean, that's fantastic insight, and thank you for sharing that Susan. If we can, and I think this is going to be part of our challenge, but maybe shift our focus to the application of this to maybe more an individual, because in an ideal world, on a macro level, an entire parish is coming together and saying, yes, we want to do this, or the entire leadership of the parish maybe come together and saying they want to do this.
Right.
But sometimes it's individuals. It might be a pastor by himself who really feels called, but the rest of the individuals in his flock might not have that mindset yet. Or it could be a member of a parish staff, or it could even be a Catholic in the pew or a catechist or a volunteer who has gained this mindset, this turning around, but others in that parish haven't. So maybe thinking in that individual way, granted, knowing it won't be completely perfect, the goal is reaching towards really the leadership of a parish, kind of making that drive. But even if we talk about maybe our sphere of control, like that which we do oversee,
right,
and if we're to start thinking in terms of these 4 ways, you mentioned about the organizational way, about needing to say, where is our energies being directed? Where's our funds being directed? If speaking to the individual, it sounds like we're asking them to start with the end in mind, right? You have to give people a why before you start doing or initiating that program. How, if someone's like never really gotten that concept before, what advice would you give to someone about starting with the end in mind and giving people a why?
Boy, that's a lot. I would say, there's nothing more powerful than starting with the end in mind. Okay. This is not going to be as simple as building something with some kind of step-by-step instructions, because people are not that simple, right? Parishes are not that simple. It's a dynamic group of people, and all the people who live outside of the boundaries of that particular church property, but within that geographic area, it's not simple. But if you start with the end in mind, and that end is along the lines of, it's like everybody, God calls everybody to come to table, and to say yes to his plan for their lives. It will inspire you in ways where you realize what your next step is, whether you're an individual or part of a group. Some of those models really do work better if you're by yourself, or you've got 1 or 2 or 3 other people in your parish. It's like, well, we want to do something about this. It's like, honestly, the whole spiritual multiplication small groups thing is doable by 4 people. All you need is 4 people to get it started. And it can be as simple as that. It's very organic. Let me put it that way. On the other hand, if you're in another position of authority, for example, where you are somebody who, a pastor is ultimately going to oversee a budget, but maybe you're on, finance council. Okay. Maybe you're the person who's going to step into finance council. It's kind of like, we really need to put our money where our mouth is on this one. And if we're going to be a church of the Great Commission, that means we need to think a little bit about how we either raise more money or shift some money around so that we have a director of evangelization, or we give the people who are working here already deeper training, right, in a particular field or something like that. When you begin with the end in mind, it gives you the flexibility to recognize that God can be calling you to one thing this year and then not to let go of it per se, but move on to another thing the next year. We really need to recognize that Jesus Christ is going to lead us, but not necessarily give us a map, right? You know what I mean by that? It's kind of like, it's easy for us to have a map, or really, it's going to be Google Maps. Who are we kidding? It's going to be Google Maps, and they're going to give us, it's like turn left here, turn right here, right? Step by step. It's very assuring when it works, especially. But that's not ever what the Lord has called us to. He's called us to a relationship, and he's willing and saying he will guide us through this, but it means we need to trust him with each step and not jump ahead of ourselves, other than to see he wants this glorious end for every human being on earth. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think it's such, to what you named, it can be so easy to want just that step by step and then to just do that. If I'm a catechist, like my kids aren't paying attention to me, what's the trick? What's the step by step? No one's showing up to my Bible study. What's the trick? What's the step by step? Mass attendance is down. What's the trick? What's the step by step?
Right.
And as opposed to saying, well, do you even know what you're trying to do with them? Right? It's not just a trick of getting them more engaged with a program. It's where you're trying to take them in the end. To me, I hearing you speak, that's what I find as a true value for starting with the end in mind. Is if you don't know where you ultimately want to go, it may not be clear how to get there. Then you're really not going to know where you're going. I defer to Simon Sinek talks about the celery test, right? Which I'll ask everyone to Google it on their own for the sake of time. But the long story short is if someone walked in to your Bible study or to your faith formation classroom or to your parish council meeting or to a liturgy at your church, would they get where you're trying to go? Would they get what you're trying to do? Like just by observing, what would they take away from it? And I think sometimes in our minds, we get very good at being like, this is where I want to go, but we actually never really communicate it. Like, do we actually come across people who like Jesus? Like that, it might be a silly question, but do we actually do that? I think this is where kind of the church's advice of thinking in terms of, real church language, the catechumenal model, or the catechumenal process, what I call kind of a discipleship pathway, is really helpful because there is a clear end there. It's helping someone experience conversion. You named it before, that repenting of that first proclamation, to then actively make a choice to follow Christ. And I invite any viewers, this is the work of Sherry Waldell, right, of forming intentional disciples.
Yep.
But to that piece, and especially kind of, in your experience, when you said you met with a lot of pastors in writing this book, what advice would you give to someone who's never really thought of what they do in terms of a discipleship pathway, in terms of kind of working someone through pre-evangelization, evangelization to conversion, to start making a shift of what you're doing to actually be reflective of that kind of a process, which is different than a program, right? The catechism model is not a program. It's a way of being. But if you've never really operated that way or thought that way, what advice might you give to help someone in their classroom, in their Bible study, or maybe in the parish to start planning in terms of that kind of a pathway?
Okay, well, number one, if you're aware that there's a discipleship pathway, you're so far ahead of so many people, honestly, in the Catholic Church. So I mean that seriously. It's like that's good. Just even being aware of it is a step in the right direction. Knowing what pre-evangelization and evangelization and catechesis and discipleship and mission all mean. I mean, I think if you're able to step back from your particular role in your parish or in the church and look at, let's just say it's a Bible study. Okay. Let's just say it's a Bible study. Think about it. It's like, where do you fit on the discipleship pathway, right? If you understand what those terms mean, where do you fit on that discipleship pathway? I will tell you, it's like most likely you fit in discipleship. Okay. It's like, unless you have a very unusual Bible study where you're basically inviting people in who are not initiated in the church, right, or something like that, then it might be a little bit more of an evangelization piece. A lot of it depends less on the content and more how you present it, to be perfectly candid. But own it is what I would say. Own where your particular ministry fits on the discipleship path. And when you know that, you know better who to try to invite into it, right? The best thing about having an active discipleship path in every parish is that then when people come with questions or you get to know people well enough, it's kind of like this is where they're at in their spiritual life, you can point them in the right direction. It's kind of like, this is, this would be something that would be a real growth opportunity for you rather than just shoving everybody into whatever is the latest thing that we're doing at the parish, right? Because some things just work for some people and they don't for others. It's like other people are, further along on the path, all of that, right?
Right.
So that would just be my suggestion.
Yeah, I wonder how often do we really take the time to discern where people are?
Yeah.
Like I'll use, parish religious ed usually as an example. That is an example, like perfectly speaking, of discipleship. You are actively teaching someone, catechizing someone about the doctrine of the faith, right? That was originally what it was intended to be. That's really something that's done in a discipleship phase. Someone who has already made the commitment to follow Jesus and therefore has an impetus, a desire to want to learn those things. Like the people you named in a Bible study. I absolutely agree. If you're in a Bible study, usually it's because you have some interest in scripture because you have already made some kind of level of commitment to Jesus. But if the people in your religious ed, like if the kids in your religious ed their families don't go to church, they don't really go to mass, Jesus is not normalized at home, they're probably more in a pre-evangelization stage where they need to build initial trust with the church, or evangelization where they're just first encountering the basic gospel message. And to treat them like you would someone in a discipleship phase is almost like a disservice to them. Like, you're going to get frustrated. They're not going to really get a ton out of it. And so, I mean, if there's nothing else, I mean, to individuals who might be feeling like they're spinning their wheels, is as a really first step is, if you know that the end in mind is you want to take them closer to Christ, in a relationship with Christ, and let's say make that commitment, then can you somehow, by getting to know them, by the conversations that you have, then discern where are the people that I'm working with? Are they more pre-evangelization? Are they more evangelization? Are they more discipleship? Because then that'll dictate what you should do with the rest of your time. Like if they're already in a discipleship, like if you have a Bible study, like you mentioned, and they're really in it, you might be starting to think differently, not about like, how do I give the gospel newly to them, but more like, who's someone I could tap here for a more leadership opportunity? Like you mentioned, the multiplication model, I could then take aside and be like, hey, you've been a member of our Bible study for a long time. How would you feel about starting a new Bible study to reach more people? And I'll work with you to know how to run one. As opposed to like, if you have, like, I'd imagine people will show up to an Alpha or a Christ Life are going to be more in the whole, what is church about?
Right.
And you're not going to really ask them to start a new Alpha series or a new small group, but you might come to talk to them and realize, they have some wounds you really need to address in their life. So I think if we can really, regardless of if we're a parish leader or clergy or even a volunteer or a parishioner, and whatever it is that is our sphere that we can work with, determine, yes, I do want to bring them closer to Christ. And okay, then these people, where are they? And so let me plan based off of that. And there's still going to be challenges as you named, Susan, in terms of the Lord leads us, but doesn't tell us the exact
Right.
means to get there.
Right.
But I hope that would produce a lot more fruitful an experience.
Right.
Bring people actually to that turning around than simply just, let's run this program and we will judge its success based on how many people showed up and if they come back to something else.
Right.
So that's hopefully that would be my encouragement to all those watching this. And Susan, I really appreciate your insight in helping us get there, because it can be really, really big challenging to in a parish of saying nothing's working, no one's coming back, no one's engaged, my kids aren't listening. To invite them, as you said, to pray, to think with where do you want to take them, and to assess kind of where they are. I mean, any thoughts, Susan, as we wrap up here, that you'd like to leave us with?
Only that's all really, really good. And if this sounds a little messy, it's inherently a little messy. Okay. It's like, if you're one of these people who wants things to be very neat and clean cut, I'm sorry. It's just not, there's a logic to this, right? Both a spiritual logic and just even a psychological or sociological logic to it. But it's inherently going to be a little bit messy. And part of it is, that's more reason why we need to lean on the Lord on this, right? It's kind of, we're not the ones in control of this. We're cooperating with the Lord in order to, renew his parish, not our parish, his parish.
Right.
So yeah, it's just true. But not to live, don't give up any hope here. It's kind of like, the Lord wants our parishes renewed so much more than we do. So if we keep listening in prayer to the Lord as to what's going to happen next, as to what the next step is, it's like only good things can come out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome, Susan. Well, Susan, once again, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and for sharing your insight. And for those of you who haven't checked it out, please visit gracewatch.org to see all the good things Susan Windley-Daoust is doing, and a lot of great resources that she's offering that parishes and individuals can use on parish evangelization. If you haven't read or grabbed a copy, please grab a copy of her book, The 4 Ways Forward. Thank you, everyone, for what you do. And thank you, Susan, once again.
Thank you. Good to talk to you.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.